This is More Than Before with Nathan Cook.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the podcast. I am really excited today because we have a very special guest, and you may have actually heard his voice before on the show, multiple times on the show. In fact, he is the voice of the More Than Before podcast. Right at the very intro, you hear his voice welcoming us in to this wonderful time where we get to learn about people's stories, who they are, and who they were created to be. Today, we get to learn more about his story. He is a father. He is a son. He is a follower of Jesus Christ. He is a really good friend of mine. We've known each other for a number of years. In fact, one of the things I really love about getting together with him is he is so deep. We're going to go deep really, really fast today. And we're going to get to some really great nuggets that you guys are going to be able to take away and introduce into your life. He is also the CSO of Gift Nonprofit Strategies. So without further ado, Gunnar Simonsen, how are you today? How are you today, brother?
I'm doing great, and I just feel like the pressure's on right now. More than before. Was that good?
Yeah.
More than to before.
Yeah, more than to be before. Yeah.
I think there was a few takes like that before I got that. Sent it over to you.
It can be a little bit of a tongue twister, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's great to be here. It's great to be in the studio.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. And just
first person in the studio,
yes,
too.
the inaugural visit.
The inaugural visit. So it's good to actually have a guest in person. You know, it was funny because yesterday I gave you a call and I was like, man, I don't know if I'm ready to have a guest in person because it feels like way more pressure. But I love what you said, and it really captures what I want this show to be, which is the microphone is a cup of coffee between two friends.
Yes, absolutely. I was in radio broadcasting school just years ago, obviously. And it was KMHD 89.1 jazz station here in the Portland area. And that was one of the lessons they taught. That microphone is just nothing more than just a cup of coffee between two friends. And that just resonated with me throughout time. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to have some coffee and we're going to go deep.
We are. So I love what you said, actually, because it's a really great springboard into kind of the first area to go into, because so many of us, we wake up, we put on an identity.
Yeah.
We put on these false identities and we walk around like we have our routines to kind of get us in the mode. And really, really that idea of coffee between two friends, when you show up with a friend, you put your guard down. And you've done a lot of work in this area specifically to show up as the person you were created to be. I'm curious, you know, your life is a book. We all we all are a book. Our lives are a story.
Yeah.
In those earlier chapters in life, I'm curious for you, what were some of the major chapters early on in your life that really shaped your vision as you moved into showing up in the future?
You know, that's a great question. You know, identity, how we always show up. You know, I did for years. I showed up as this person, and you've known me for a long time, right? I'm a little bit of a different person today than I
think
was
you're a lot of bit of a different person
7 or 8 years ago, right? You know, and I love, you know, I think about Bob Marley's quote, I didn't change, I just found myself. And, you know, I carried a lot of hurt and pain in my life and some trauma that really became my identity over time. You know, I carried a lot of it that I didn't even know I was carrying. You know, at some point in life, I think we all have something happens to you. You know, some people, right? I think a lot of people, something happens to you and you develop from that coping mechanisms. And those coping mechanisms over time become cognitive biases. They become our truth.
Yeah.
Right. And then over time, they become blind spots. And then over time, they act out in a way of just almost like insanity, doing the same thing over and over, but expecting different results until the wheels come off.
Yeah.
So you keep showing up as someone that you were never meant to be because you've been, the switch was flipped on mission drift at some point in life with your identity. And for me, it was affirmation. I needed affirmation. I feared rejection. I feared abandonment. Right. So everything I did was around that. Everything that I heard, I was all about autocorrect before we got iPhones.
Yeah.
Right. I was autocorrecting what things that I was hearing people say to me about me. And it just became over time, just more ingrained to my identity. And fortunately, I had some success through it, but it was never really truly sustained because I was living within the parameters of someone I was never meant to be. And, I look back on that, and that's been a lot of the work that I've been doing, this last few years, and just really unpacking my life story.
Yeah.
As I said, Richard Rohr, first half of life is we write the text, the second half we write the commentary. And so I'm doing a lot of writing the commentary now in my 50s of understanding life and through all the change that I've experienced the last 6 7 years. And one of those things has been identifying some key areas of my life, my key blind spots, my key cognitive biases, where I can point back on my life throughout my story where my identity it couldn't go any further.
Yeah.
It was always tied in this loop, this cycle of recidivism of just being someone I was never meant to be.
And one of the things that I remember early on when we first met, so we
Yeah.
actually met at a backyard.
Yes.
Not a, like, I guess technically it was a backyard.
Some random backyard.
Some random
down the
backyard. We
street.
both wandered in, like, hey, this guy's having a barbecue.
Yeah.
No, we
Smells
we wandered in to a mutual friend's house.
Yes.
He opens up his house to a bunch of guys, and they'll have cigars and whiskey and some food, and it's just a place for you to get real. And one of the things I really loved is, we got to connect at this backyard and really got to understand and know one another through that. But it was more of at a distance. And then as we actually started to get to know one another, as we started to get coffee, and we'd go and close coffee shops down essentially because we'd be there for so long, we really did walk through a lot of the concepts that you're living today. But it was a small change that you started to make that really started to give you momentum. There's a number that comes to mind that, at least to me, signifies a small step of change. We've heard the old Chinese proverb that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Yeah.
I'm curious, for all of you listening, tune in for this. This is going to be really good. What does the number 10,000 mean to you?
Wow. 10,000 means a lot. I'm a 10,000 stepper, I guess what you can call, right? At some point in my journey, not quite a year into an experience that I had at the ER in August of 2017. It was April of that next year, 2018, where I had picked up a Fitbit because I'd been getting into walking and running and just completely changing, everything that had been cultivating and starting anew. And it had a set 10,000 steps a day. So I had kept that, I said, oh, that sounds like a great goal. I was just so hungry to establish goals in my life that would become lifestyle. And we talk about who goals and do goals, right?
Yeah.
Who goals. I think Craig Russell talks about it on his leadership podcast, does those goals that this is the person I want to become. So what are the goals, the habits that I need to establish and cultivate that are going to help me get there? 10,000 steps became one of those. Matter of fact, I'd ran into a friend of mine who was an elite athlete. They did do this thing where it's like Ironman in Hawaii. They did like 4 in a week or something. Just crazy, right?
Things that we were never meant to do.
Yeah. And so I'm probably, 7 8 months into this life change and, dropped about 100 pounds, literally. When you change your eating habits and you start working on, when you get surrendered on the outside and you can get to a place of getting active on the outside and getting surrendered on the inside, it can do a lot for you. I found the power of forgiveness. So just lost a lot of weight, but now I wanted to really begin to see some of these new habits take hold. And so I started 10,000, but I ran into my friend of mine and he hadn't seen me in a while. And he's like, wow, do you mind if I give you a couple bits of advice? And I'm like, well, sure. When you're in that and when you're living in that space, right? And you're just acutely aware of just wisdom when it comes knocking on your door and you just sponge it up and you want more of you just immersed in reading articles about, fitness, health, and all of that, which was foreign. If you knew me, right? It was not who I was, a year prior. And he said to me, he says, first one, I says, get yourself a pair of Brooks shoes. He's obviously, working for Brooks. He's not, sponsored by Brooks.
Yeah.
But, get yourself a pair of Brooks shoes and then keep this up for a year for it to become lifestyle. And that really, really stuck with me because that resonated. I wanted this to become a lifestyle. I wanted to have an active lifestyle. I did not have an active lifestyle at all. And I wanted to establish that. And I knew this was going to be one thing that was going to establish not only become a lifestyle over time, but just disciplines and those daily habits, a daily sense of completion on something.
Mm,
But the reality is, you know, at 12 o'clock midnight, it rolls back to 0 steps, right? So I've been getting with that, I've been getting 10,000 steps a day every day since November 4th, 2018. And so I don't even know how many days that is. I don't even look. It's just kind of what I do.
yeah.
I know it's, over 21 million steps, 11,000 miles. So, and it reminds me, I was talking to a friend of mine on this, and he brought up this Latin phrase. I think it's St. Augustine. It says "Salvator ambulando," and that means it is solved by walking. And I feel like the more years and the more days I'm getting out there getting steps and in writing the commentary, I feel like I'm out there. It's solved by walking.
And it's interesting because your story, much like I think a lot of people's stories, when they come to kind of that fork in the road in their health journey, something
Yeah.
happens, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me because it wasn't the first time. Like we always think of like, oh, there's one event, and that's the event that told me that I needed to shift. However, that wasn't the first time
Yeah.
that someone had said, "Hey, Gunnar, you got to get your health in check."
Yeah.
Right? There's I like to think of it in terms of life teaches us either with a 2x4 or with a feather.
It's,
I would much rather learn being gently touched and said, "Hey, don't do that. You got to go do something else," versus the traumatic 2x4 that hits you in the face and you go, "Oh, if I don't change, there's a wall that's coming next."
yeah.
Do you recall like any stories like that specifically?
August 19th, 2017 was the breaking point. Going to the ER, just having some heart issues for several weeks leading up. It was almost like having sleep apnea during the
Mm.
day. And, I was brought up in a family with like pain, what's that? Or you just push through it. And finally just said, I got to go in and get checked. This is just getting too scary.
Mm.
And, I went into the urgent care first, and then they immediately sent me to the ER. But the last thing that doctor said, looked me straight in the eyes, and he said, stress kills.
Mm.
And, that was the two words that just changed the trajectory. Now, I can go back over years, all the way back to my early 30s, and going to see the doctor and saying, man, you're at a high risk for heart attack and stroke. And starting there, and then, head on collision accidents, things like that. I had one experience, it was crazy, that I was, because I don't know that anybody ever really came right out and said it.
Yeah, it's always
Right.
it's always kind of danced around. No
Yeah.
one ever says, "Hey, Gunnar, like you're a little overweight. Let's taper that down." I feel
Absolutely.
that way too.
Yeah.
Like, "Hey, Nathan, looks like you've been eating really well."
Well, and it's interesting when I started losing a lot of weight, that's when I heard a lot more feedback.
Interesting.
You're losing a little bit, hey, you gotta have a little more, meat on your bones, and I'm like, well, like, where were you? I mean, where were you, months ago?
Yeah.
But there was one instance, it was, I was working with a group of pretty well-known figures, public figures, and we were at a meeting in Dallas, Texas, and one of them is a pretty well-known. I'll keep the name, off the record here, but we were screening a video project that we were working on in this small theater, and there was probably 10, 11 of us there. And we just got up, it's probably 11:30 at night, and I was tired, I just stretching, a big stretch, and my shirt just kind of pulls up, and from across the room, he says, Gunnar, either you need to get a bigger shirt or a smaller belly. And I don't even know. I mean, it's one of those things where you don't even realize it at the time. You just kind of almost like, wow, why am I in the room with this person? This person's, I'm just kind of idolizing this person, right? It's a big name, right? And so you don't think anything of it, right? And then, fast forward, 2 years later, I think, and I'm with a group of guys that are affiliated with him in Colorado, up on someone's backyard. Speaking of, a lot of things happen in backyards,
Yeah.
right?
A lot of good
Up on
things
the
happen in
deck.
backyards.
We're all just sitting around, hanging around. I think probably having cigars, and in Colorado. And he shows up, and he's walking around, and he's shaking hands to everybody. I haven't talked to him in 2 years, and he's shaking hands to everybody, and he's slowly getting around, and he gets to me. And he'd been greeting people for probably 10, 15 minutes, and he gets to me. He looks at me, he says, looks like you got a bigger shirt. And I still didn't get it.
Wow.
But it was never a waistline thing for me. it was quite frankly, it was a no room in the inn kind of thing for me. Meister Eckhart, I think it's 13th century monk, says that the soul grows not by addition, but by subtraction. I needed, there was just a lot of stuff on the inside that quite frankly was keeping me from really seeing my true identity. There was just a lot of hurts and pains, and that was holding on to me. There was no room in the inn thing.
Yeah.
But even then it just wasn't enough. But it is always, for me, it was just a culmination of just different things that I find myself, and the doctor's like, hey, stress kills.
There's a lot of people that we meet in day-to-day life. It's funny because I was just seeing a social media post today, and it was about a very well-known person who just won a bunch of awards, and it was a picture of them with their tuxedo on and great award, and they look just absolutely perfect and happy. Yeah. And then picture right next to it is the picture of this person with tears in their eyes because they had just committed themselves into therapy because they were trying to take their life. Yeah. And so many people are carrying weight. They're and not physical weight. We're talking the baggage of life. You've had to do a lot of work in terms of unpackaging and really figuring out what to do with this stuff, right? We all have these heavy backpacks that we stuff full of wounds and hurts. Yeah. What does forgiveness do in your life? Like how has that played? Because I feel like that's been a huge component in your story to learn how to forgive. How do you forgive someone, and how does that help you to unpackage the baggage that you carry over the years?
Yeah, it's a great question. What is forgiveness? What's the formula for forgiveness? Like, I'm going to wake up today, I'm going to forgive this person for doing just horrific things or whatever, fill in the blank, right? And so what is it? I'll always remember a conversation I had with this young man, and he was sharing my story at that time, and had lost 100 pounds. And I always say you can't outrun on the outside what you're battling on the inside. One way or another, it'll find its way, right? And that's just hurt and pain and such. It'll metastasize its way out into action. And I remember I said, how do you, he's like, how did you do it? How did you lose all that weight? How did you do that? And I said, well, how do you think? And we stopped waiting in a parking lot, right? And he stopped and he for just not even a second, he goes, determination. I said, no, it was forgiveness. When I had come out of the ER, I had an awareness. I had a clarity that I'd never experienced before. I went into that ER that day. I woke up that day just resigned in life. I'm done. Yeah. Stick a fork in me. I'm not going. I don't have it. But I walked out of the ER with a resolve that this doesn't have to be the way it is. And I hooked up with a doctor. I was going to a therapist. I was going to some other group meetings. And one of the things that I just had this moment of clarity of, okay, I'm going to get active. I'm going to do this. But I also became acutely aware that I also have things that I do that are going to sabotage those efforts. Yeah. Stress eating was one of them, right? And I had to unpack that. Why am I stress eating? What I found was I was holding on to things. The pipes were rattling in the basement, right? Because I couldn't hold anything more in, and I was a stress eater, and I was doing these things. And why? And I had to kind of do the work to work my way back, reverse engineer some things back to some hurt in my life. And, I remember that fall, wasn't long after that, where I had, was talking to someone that had created some hurt in my life that was pretty, impactful. Yeah. And I remember just telling them, I forgive you. And that was just a game changer. It doesn't mean, I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean endorsement. This means I'm not going to carry this baggage anymore. I'm going to let go of this. Right. And I'm going to embrace my identity. I picked up your baggage along the way, somewhere along the way, the baggage that someone else handed you, so being able to get to a place of just stepping back and looking at it with perspective through that lens, it was able to, bring softness to my heart, empathy, and of course, my faith in Jesus. I wouldn't have any of it without that. And so, but it's brought the, the ability to be able, growing. I don't know if we ever arrive. I think I've mastered forgiveness. I've mastered love.
Wait,
right?
5 minutes.
Right? Just add water. But it's one of those things as I grow more in my faith, my heart just gets softer. And I'm not perfect. It's not about perfection. Man, I need forgiveness, right? But it really helped me to be able to see things through a different set of different lens, and to be able to be more empathetic and to see myself different. And it really created room in the end for God to do the work that he was doing in my life.
Yeah.
To really get me focused again on just locking in with, this is the person I created you to be. For such a time as this. You have breath in your lungs, but there was just no room in the end for me to even see it. And I was trying to earn it too, because I had an affirmation thing, and I was always trying to earn approval and earn the Father's love. So.
Where do you feel like that approval comes from? Like, I think a lot of times, like even in my own life, because I think we all fall into the approval piece at some point, that we're looking to fill some void inside of our life that maybe wasn't necessarily met at some point. As you look back, looking at some of the context of life, what were some of those things early on in your life that you go, maybe that's where I started to seek more affirmation of other people versus affirmation from your creator?
Yeah. For me, affirmation from my creator, I wasn't brought up in the church. And so that came, later. But I think that, and if I go back in time, interesting. I've been thinking about this actually a lot with my relationship with my father, who died 20 years ago. In March 13th, 2003. He was 40 years older than me. And the last time I ever saw my father was the first time he ever said, "I love you."
Wow.
And I know that throughout life, I think, boys and fathers, I think, oftentimes as well, and we all crave for that, right? But you just want that affirmation. You just want to hear those words, and you allow that. When you don't hear those words, it can become one of those cognitive biases in life where you just misinterpret it based on all I know. Interesting thing, this last year, November, on his birthday, I always try to write a post, and just think about my dad and write a post to honor him. I really, for the first time, really was led to some homework that I needed to do on the fact that he was a part of the silent generation. And, coming in as a child, right? He's, you've got 1930s going through the Depression, World War II, the McCarthyism and all of this stuff, right? You just kept quiet, and very resilient. You adapt, but you don't express. It's certainly not like, the greatest generation before him and then, afterwards. And it really clicked for me. I hope that, we all do the best we can with what we've been given, and hopefully we continue to evolve, down the family line, and we grow and such. But being a part of the silent generation really was a light bulb moment for me. Here I am, 53 years old, and just studying about the silent generation for the first time and thinking, man, that makes a lot of sense. And my dad loved me, just didn't know how to say it.
Yeah. And I even recall you, like there was such an affection for your dad growing up. I recall you telling the story of sitting on the couch with your dad. He, like you said, he didn't show a lot of emotion and a lot of things, but you'd be watching something and it would make him laugh.
Yeah.
And I remember you saying, I would just stare at him, mesmerized, and just almost in a studious way, studying him.
Yeah.
Because even for myself as a son, I think back and I think, man, like there were so many times where I wanted to not just gain the affection of my father, but I wanted to gain the attention of him, and not in the bad way, right? not that my father was cruel or mean or anything, but I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to see who I was.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people crave that. They crave that attention.
Yeah.
And early on in life, I think if we don't get the correct amount, I think you can get too much.
Yeah,
I think you can
I get that.
too little. But at the end of the day, when you start to live your life from a place of needing affection and attention, all of a sudden you start to find yourself in relationships that you never intended to be in.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this the other day, kind of thinking about your story. You've had a lot of what most people would look at as a do-over in life. You've had a second chance in health. You've had a second chance in marriage. You've had a second, like, this is what's really amazing to me. You have a second chance in parenting. Your daughter, she's grown, she's married, she's got a great husband who is a great leader. And now you find yourself in the later stages in life and you get a second chance to raise a young boy. What's different this time around raising a child versus when you, like, obviously when you first, I've got 3 kids, they're all young. They're all under 5 years old right now.
Yeah.
And when I look at my kids, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing half the time.
Yeah.
You've had a few years between to, from your daughter going out and being successful in what she's doing. And now you get to kind of have a do-over almost, in a sense, that you get to invest in another young life on a day-to-day basis in your house. What's the difference now in raising someone versus years ago?
Well, I mean, that's, again, another, I'm doing a lot of writing of the commentary lately, to be honest with you. And thanks for bringing that up with my father. I remember sitting on the couch. We'd be watching like Barney Miller or WKRP Cincinnati, whatever. And, something would happen. You knew it was funny. And immediately Dad would just be in his chair and he would just be laughing out loud. And it just was, I just remember just looking, it's like, it was just an emotion that I didn't normally see, from my dad. And
not to interrupt you either, but there was also another time that I remember that he showed you affection when you were in the hospital.
Yeah.
That was another pivotal moment.
Yeah, that was, actually it was just a few years before he passed in 2001. It was August 6th. I know these dates because it was back surgery. I was having back surgery. I had never gone in and had a surgery or you were put under. And so I was a little bit nervous about that. And I remember they're getting ready to wheel me back, and my dad was there, and he reached out his hand and he just grabbed my hand for a moment, and he'd never done that before. I mean, so I'm 31 at the time. He'd never done anything like that, and I don't even remember if I could recall what his hand even felt like. But he reached out his hand and he just held it for a moment, and that was everything, because it just said to me, it's going to be okay. And that was Dad. I think, he just knowing now through the silent generation of what he had experienced and just how, well, they are adapting and they're just so resilient. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And so that was another moment that really, really struck me. Now, fast forward here, my daughter's, an adult and just so proud of her and her husband. And I get a chance to be a stepdad. And, I think there's a lot of things that I'm just so grateful that I get to do over. I feel personally I'm a different person. I'm a softer person. I mean, Jesus has made an impact in my life. And I hope that those around me see that. I think it's always better when others see it than when you touting about it, right? Proclaiming about it, right? I think true change always has a way of going up ahead of you on the road and speaking on your behalf.
Yeah.
Instead of ourselves, right? Just, be humble, right? For once, right? But I feel like, I'm just not the same person that I was. I mean, I have a young, a 10-year-old stepson, and, I'm 53, and we have a lot of fun, and I'm a different person. Yeah. I think not every hill is a hill worth dying on, right? When you're not even sure of yourself and you're still trying to figure out who you are, how in the world, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just handing more baggage to others, right? I feel like I have a better sense of myself. I don't take myself as seriously. I'm going to be who I am because this is who God made me to be. And this is who God made this beautiful child to be. I'm just going to start there and stop putting so much pressure on myself to be perfect or to look a certain way or to try to prove myself to whoever's watching. Wow, you look like you're a great.
Yeah.
Well, it's not about perfection. It's about a process. And I think too, being honest with that, with your kids, there's going to be times where you're certainly not being perfect.
Yeah, you have to own your
You
manure.
have to own it.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Right.
And I think at one point, I actually remember you talking about at one point, until you're able to own that manure and you spread it out,
Yeah.
you can actually cultivate the things that are in your life. Right.
Yeah, you've got to own it. And I think that there's nothing wrong with just being able to, hey, when you're gonna mess up as a parent, right? Hopefully it's
You mean
know,
you're not you mean you're not the perfect parent?
no, but being able to just have enough self-awareness to own it.
Yeah.
Be humble enough to be able to say, hey, look, you know what? I'm sorry. You know what? Parenting isn't about a perfection. It's about a process. And just taking ownership, taking responsibility when you're not, being that person that you should be, because who among us, right? It doesn't give you the excuse to continue in that, right? Do the work. Okay, why did I react that way? Why did I, whatever, right? And just begin to learn it. We're all learning and growing. So I think I feel like I have a little bit more a little bit more years. I have a little bit more reflection and self-awareness. But on the other hand, too, it's interesting, just how our kids and just different, the culture is different.
Yeah.
Generation, are different. They have different interests, and just technology and things like that. Or, I get a little bit, nervous about, but.
Well, and I think it's a really great space to even jump into, like social media. Social media, you've been I wouldn't say necessarily a guru, because guru isn't maybe our favorite word to say in the world, but you've been an expert in that area of marketing for a long time. What do you see in terms of showing up on social media? How do you show up? Because you work with a number of companies on branding and showing up, and how do you show up authentically on social media without throwing all your baggage out, right? Because like you don't want to throw everything out there. Like we all have sensitive information that's happened in our lives, and it's not necessarily that we don't want to share it. It's more that we want to protect the people that we love and we care about, and we've all made mistakes, and so you don't want to throw people under the bus.
Yeah.
How do you go about sharing your story, parts of your story that are maybe sensitive to other people, but you still want to share some of the lessons in that, because the lessons are impactful, that can help a lot of people?
Well, I think right off the bat, be accountable, be accountable, and then be intentional. A lot of times we'll just sit down and go, and we'll let it rip. Sometimes we'll see those posts that are like, 15 paragraphs long. Now, I used to write some pretty long ones back in the day. I was like, what are you writing? Just write a book, man. but be accountable. And I think being intentional, right? Thinking about your story. How often do we hit pause and write the commentary? How often are we hitting pause and just reflecting, okay, what just happened there?
Yeah.
We're always on to the next thing. Everything's just keeping us busy. We don't ever have time for reflection, to pause and reflect on our story. And for me, it's just the journey that I'm on with the friends around me, my faith, and just understanding my story. Because words create worlds. And what world am I, creating by what I'm sharing and what I'm saying? And and so I think, be accountable. Be intentional. It's so easy to be alone and be a keyboard warrior and do your thing, right? But I think being vulnerable, being transparent, people, I think they're tired of just the show. They're tired of the facade. They're tired of just the masks that I wore one forever. I was afraid, to be honest. Now I look back and read a lot of my stuff and I cringe, because I'm living this person I never knew I was never meant to be, and I was saying stuff that was kind of low key, affirmation, and it was just cringy. I look at it and I'm just, no. And I think we all, if we're honest, would go back in our social media feeds for a decade and just go, what was I thinking, right?
Yeah.
So go easy on yourself, give yourself grace. But I always try to keep things at no more than 400 words. I remember when I was first starting to write articles for an industry magazine in the music industry years ago, and they'd always say, okay, the article needs to be 700 words, no more than that. First draft would always be about 3,000 words. I'm like, how am I going to say this like that? But it really helps you focus and really kind of hone in on what you're trying to say, what your message is, right? I want to write it clearly on a tablet so that a runner can take it and run with it.
Yeah.
And I want it to be intentional.
Push pause and rewind that for a second, because that's so good what he just said. And you might have just easily just brushed past it because everything that's coming out of this guy's mouth is just so good. But you got to go back and listen to this part because it's so good what he's talking about. Editing. You have to edit what you're saying so that you can give it to a runner and they can go and they can share it with someone else. Referencing, someone who you would give a message to way back when, before phones, and you would, even before paper, it would be like, hey, I want you to go run this message, tell this to the king. This is what they need.
From the Old Testament.
From the Old Testament. Hey, go figure. But there's something really true to this. You have to be concise and careful and formulated with your words. Not so much that you're trying to edit it to make it perfect, but so that it's clearly communicated.
Yeah.
How important has it been for you to go through, because like you said, you could easily write books upon books of everything that's happened in your life, but you have to edit it down to something that's digestible, that's clear, that's concise, that someone can take and that can run. How important has that editing process been for you? And how does that continue to free you up to move forward today?
Well, it's been huge, right? Clarity is the antidote to anxiety, right? And, I've got to continue to pursue clarity and how I'm living, but also what I'm sharing and the words that I'm sharing. Am I clear as mud? Does that make sense? Yeah. So, but I think it's so important. And I've been, just blessed to have a lot of good people in my life that have challenged me on just pursuing, the editing piece. Yeah. Not just in writing, but just in how we're speaking, what we're sharing, and who we are. But, don't press, post. If you're just angry.
Yeah.
You think about right now, we're going into 2024, and we're talking about messaging. Words create worlds. Well, what kind of world are your words creating versus what kind of world do you want to live in? We're going into 2024 where, I think we all can agree that we're kind of like bracing
for the volatility that's
what's coming.
Yeah.
Right. Think twice. Most of us, when we're writing in that kind of a place, we're writing from within the comforts of the echo chamber. And yet somehow we want to get the attention of someone outside of our echo chamber. And we don't realize that the words we speak, you might as well be shooting guns. Right? That person's not going to have a conversation with you. You're not going to change that person's mind. Maybe it's time to reboot the mission here.
Yeah.
And think about, what world we want to create. And it starts with conversation. It starts with clarity. It starts with just being intentional, but also starts with being transparent, being vulnerable.
Yeah.
I always say you got to own your stuff, right? Don't point and say you, and say your serenity prayer. Be humble.
It really leads really well into cognitive bias. You've done a lot of work recently on cognitive bias. And for those of you that don't know what cognitive bias is, I want you to explain a little bit about what that is. But then how has that played a role in how you navigate life now, knowing that you have these cognitive biases in your life, right? Because we're going into 2024 here. Or we're in 2024 actually. Yeah. And we have a lot of stuff that's going to be happening this year, and we easily fall into that cognitive bias. What is a cognitive bias, and what are some of those cognitive biases that maybe you've seen in your life, and how are you starting to move forward and addressing those so that you don't lean into those, that you're open?
That's a great question. And generally my response would be Google it.
You might get some varied results nowadays.
Well, chat GPT it, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's the cognitive bias. It's just ingrained, truth that has been ingrained to me from a traumatic experience or something, and a fragment of that, and I store it, and it's become my truth. I trigger it the way the brain's working. I probably just totally destroyed that, but
it's okay. Go Google it. You'll find out how accurate it is.
But to me, I have these cognitive biases, and for me, it's frankly something. Someone will say something, and it'll trigger me, and I immediately will misinterpret it based on my cognitive bias, and that's where I get into trouble. That's where I end up in this endless loop, this cycle of recidivism, over and over and over and over. I fear rejection. It's my primal fear. I fear rejection and abandonment. Someone will say something, and it has nothing to do with me, but I'll autocorrect it. And I'll misinterpret it, and then I'll trigger, and then I'll react, right? It's a cognitive bias. It's a blind spot that for me started with a traumatic experience that became a coping mechanism that began to ingrain, in my brain, this is my truth.
Yeah.
And it's not true. How did I do on that? Was that good, by the way?
I liked it.
For just kind of a layman's version of that.
Well, I don't know if I would say it's a layman's. I actually really like how you talk about the triggering aspect, that we respond usually when we're triggered.
Yeah.
Right. And when we feel hurt, when we feel like it's kind of like having a wound. I love there was a definition a number of years ago that I heard from Valerie Burton, who's a coach. And one of the things that she talks about in terms of coaching is, if you're looking for a coach, that's great, but you have to make sure your wounds are healed. You don't go and work with a coach because the coach is going to take you from where you are and then move you forward.
Yeah.
If you have wounds that are open, you got to go get those healed before you move forward. Otherwise, when the coach starts to touch some of those wounds and say, "Hey, in this area we're going to move forward," they're going to be open. It's going to cause more issue than anything else. And I think a lot of what happens is, when we do get triggered, when we do respond in frustration or anger, or, with those biases of like, oh, this person is trying to hurt me or harm me. They're not saying this for my good. They're saying this for them to get ahead of me, or fill in the blank.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we have to realize that when we are triggered, when we are offended, we have to take a step back and say, well, why? Why am I feeling this way? And is that a cognitive bias that I'm looking for? Or is there an opportunity for me to grow myself to respond in a way that is actually congruent with the type of person that I want to be?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot right there that just, my mind is just like, ching, ching. A lot of things I'm thinking. First off, of what I would say is, the cognitive biases and reacting and triggering. Definitely want to do that. But I want to go back to what you're saying with Valerie and the coaching. I think that's so good. And that so often, we've said this, probably said it a million times, right? When we build application upon faulty infrastructure, it's never sustainable, right? A lot of times when we haven't done the work, right? And we have someone coaching us and they're just giving this new applications and this stuff to be able to walk in, right? We can't ever walk in a way that's sustainable because we're building it upon this faulty infrastructure. We need some rewiring.
Yeah.
Because we have some cognitive biases. We have some things that we need to, seek truth on. We need to give ourselves permission long enough to say, I need to think about what I think about and do the journaling. So I think that is something that I love. I love, when I hear that's what I come up. However, on the other side, I remember when I came out of this transition that I was in years ago, and just, the health and, marriage and all of that, right? And starting over again. One of the questions someone asked me, they said, how do you know that you're healed enough? Right? I mean, and it's not about perfection, right? I think there's a self-awareness, but I just like, what? I don't know. I won't know until I find myself in the relationship with a healthy person. And then we'll find out, because I think I found out that maybe I am on the pathway of healing because, when something arises between us, I don't react. It's not fight or flight. Not that there's not moments.
Yeah.
But it's us together against whatever. You know what I mean? I think that's when you begin. You just don't know until you find yourself in that place. And then, real healing will start to begin to, you'll begin to see it in a new way.
Yeah. I love that question. When do you know whether you're healed enough? And it could definitely be a loaded question.
Yeah.
But even thinking about it in terms of like an injury, like if you've ever been in a sport or have done anything like that, there's a moment where you hurt yourself and you go, oh my gosh, like you go to the doctor and they say, well, you got to rest. My nephew just recently tore his ACL, and he's like, oh, well, I'm going to have my surgery. He just had a surgery not long ago. And he got out of surgery and he's like, yeah, I'm going to go to this thing tonight. He's hopped up on drugs and I'm thinking, no, I don't think it's the right time to go out and hang out with friends. But there is something to be said with, you have to know your body, you have to know your life and be comfortable with the risk moving forward, right? Like with you and your wife, you had to get to a place where you were willing to be hurt again. It's not just hey, I'm healed. Nothing bad is going to ever happen again. It's, hey, I'm healed and I'm ready to go get back in the game.
Yeah.
Someone might, I'm thinking basketball right now. Someone might push me over or check
Yeah.
me, or, maybe I'll get a ball to the face or something
Sure.
like that. You got to be willing to get back and play the game. But until you're healed enough to actually play the game, you're not going to get in the game.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to
there's
sit on the sideline.
Yeah. And there's a time in a season, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you got to do the work
Mm-hmm.
to heal and to get yourself set on that, right? And be accountable again, right? Be surrounded with people so that when you do step out on, hey, no, not so much. No, I don't think it's time, and whatever. Yeah. But I think that there's that. But that's been so huge to get back in the game, because not only that is that there's so many lessons along the road of healing. We're all on a healing journey, probably a lot more than we look around, right? We're all on this journey together, and there's so much that we're learning. And boy, what a response. You've seen now you're responsible. How can you share about what you learned? Put your arms around others and say, this is what I learned from that journey. I haven't arrived yet. I'm still on my journey. It's not about perfection. Still make mistakes, but I'm growing as a person. Back to cognitive biases, though. When I began to feel compelled, I was reading a lot of Richard Rohr and Thomas Merton, the mystics at the time. But when I was compelled to really lean in, I was recognizing in my life that I was doing a lot of fighting and flighting when I was getting triggered. Didn't know why. Couldn't really put my finger on it, but I just felt challenged and compelled to say, you got to stop fighting and flighting. You got to lean in on this and learn from it. What's going on here? Really be honest with yourself. And it was when I just began to get honest with myself and begin to look at blind spots and look at my cognitive biases, the things that I was misinterpreting every single day and then triggering based on not even truth, get myself in trouble. That's when I saw the most growth in my life. I mean, because that was what was hindering me for the most growth in my life. And so I think that being willing to say, look, I need to go on a journey to figure out what my blind spots are, figure out what these cognitive biases are, figure out what these neural pathways are, these false truths that we just recite over and over and over and over and over and over whenever we get triggered.
Yeah.
That's our truth, right? I mean, we become what we cultivate, you reap what you sow. And, when you're cultivating that mindset and you're cultivating that truth that you're misinterpreting over and over and over, it just becomes you. And then you wonder why you're sitting alongside of the road with your wheels off. Nothing's ever enough.
Yeah.
I can't figure it out. I'm trying all these things, building application upon faulty infrastructure. Nothing's ever sustainable. We treat the effect if we're the cause, and we wonder why there's never any change.
I love it. I mean, it's so good. I'm curious, you've achieved a lot of success in life. From the outside,
Sure.
Most people looking in would say, Gunnar, you're very successful. You've had some amazing opportunities that you've been able to capitalize on. I think what's interesting is you would define success a lot differently than what they would see. What is success to you nowadays? Yeah. Like, we talk about this, achievement piece of we want to get more, we want to fill the in up. Right. And for you, it's been a lot of emptying. It's been a lot of refocusing. It's planting the right things. What is success in Gunnar's life?
Well, I think success in my life begins with redefining success from my life, in that, success, looking back and all the things you just described, right? Success wasn't in wealth, wasn't in any of that. I look back and it was success with opportunity. That would be success. My success was opportunities and experiences. I got that. Now, did I harness them well? Well, how can I when I'm mission drift, not living the life that I was meant to be and who I was called to be on planet Earth? And that's part of life. We're all on a journey, right? We have an awakening, we figure out who we are. Yeah. And so, but it was more about opportunities and experiences. And for that, I'm grateful, and I'm writing the commentary on that and understanding, how they apply to my life today and what success means for me today. A lot of tears were shed in the success of my past, but, I believe that, with my faith in God, that, and I've said this before, is that, God collects those tears in a bottle, and he's going to use those tears to write the very chapter of your next, write the very words of your next chapter, And so I look at those experiences and opportunities for such a time as this, and success to me is, am I loving my family? It just sounds so cliche. The stuff that you don't think about, but does my family feel loved, for one? Do those around me, do they feel loved? Or is it just always about me? Do they feel loved? Am I being intentional? I mean, things like that I think about. At the end of the day, though, I mean, for success for me is I'm going to put my head on my pillow at night when it's just me and my thoughts and God. And do I feel satisfied? Not that I lived life perfectly today, made some mistakes, always. But am I satisfied? Am I striving to become that person? For me, it's the tree planted along the river, Psalm 1. Am I satisfied? Am I at peace? Am I feeling, am I content in any circumstance, in any situation? That's what I'm striving to be. I don't always get that way. But to me, at the end of the day, that's what I want to feel. That's success for me.
I love it. I have one more question here that I want to ask you. But before I do, for all of you guys listening, I want to encourage you, go check out Gunnar. He truly is an amazing person to follow. He's got some deep insights. If I'm not mistaken, he's actually working on a book that's going to be coming out here. So I'm excited for that. So make sure you go follow him. You can search for him on Instagram's really his main
Instagram, Facebook,
Instagram, Facebook. So you can go search for him, Gunnar, Gunnar.
AR. Yes.
AR, not Gunnar. Gunnar Simonsen, Simonsen.
Yes.
Gunnar Simonsen.
Simonsen, yes.
Yeah, so go check him out. And it actually leads really well into this last little question. Yeah. And I know how much you love talking about this, which is why I wanted to ask it. Gunnar, your name actually means something very specific.
Yeah.
And, we're talking about identity. We're talking about how do we show up in life. And your name has a very specific meaning that you did not live into for many years of your life. In fact, one of the things that you would say is, I was a worrier.
Yes.
I worried about everything. We know a lot of worriers around us.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your name, and when did you start to live into the actual definition of that name? And how does that catapult you forward to where you are today and even beyond?
That's really good. That you asked that, Gunnar means warrior, warrior, just one letter. Somewhere along the line, I became a worrier, and I lived that way. That was the neural pathway. That was the cognitive bias, right? It was my blind spot. I'm a worry about everything. I'm worry about what people think. I'm worrying about what people are going to say, what people are going to think about me, because I just needed affirmation. I feared rejection. I feared abandonment. I was a worrier. Now, it was probably early 2019, and I was texting with my daughter, and she has a gift, and when she's locked in, she gets locked in, and she will stay on it. And she had a word for me, and she said, "Dad, I never liked it when you played into the whole warrior thing, because I think about this, your life and the things that you've experienced." She's like, "There's no way that you weren't a warrior," and that really struck me and reminds me of a conversation that I had at a cigar lounge with a friend of mine here in Portland. And then another friend of his walked in, and he just looked like wisdom walked into the door, right? And he walked in and he introduces me to him, and I'm sharing a bit of my life, and I'm in the thick of it during this time. It's probably 2016, 2017, in the thick of it, just all over the place. And he stopped and he looked at me, this wisdom, this man named Wisdom, stopped and he looked at me, says, sometimes you got to stop fighting long enough to put your hands down so you can actually see what you're fighting. And then, only then, you'll know what you need to surrender. And that struck me. Only then would I know what I need to surrender. There was no room in the inn. So, a warrior. I still worry, but a lot less.
So good. I hope that you guys absolutely thoroughly enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. Gunnar, you are such a great friend. I appreciate you for coming on, for pouring your life into so many people. For those of you listening, I want to encourage you, make sure you check out Gunnar. Also, follow the podcast, download it, share it with a friend. This is a great message that Gunnar shared with us today that could truly impact some lives today. So I want to encourage you, make sure you like it, make sure you share it, throw a comment on some of the social media stuff. And until next time, remember to be more, see more, and experience more than before.